The schools may be gone, but the legends live forever. Welcome to the Final Jumpshot podcast. Here's your host, Marcus Carlton.
Welcome back for another episode of the Final Jumpshot, episode 9. Hard to believe we've made it to this point, but this one will be the last episode of season 1. And we're going to talk more about that later. Right now, we've got another great interview lined up for you in this episode. Another star from Northeast Arkansas's small schools who went on to play ball at the college level. Former Stanford Razorback and Marmaduke Greyhound, Brad Baine is our guest. Now, Brad's got a very unique story. He had to change schools between his junior and senior years, but as one door closed, another door was gladly open for Brad. Here's a story of Brad Baine's high school basketball journey. Well, joining me on this episode of the Final Jump Shot is I finally get a guest in here that I actually played ball against in high school, former Stanford Razorback and Marmaduke Greyhound, Brad Baine. Brad, appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, hey, Marcus, I appreciate the invite. Always enjoy talking about the glory days.
Absolutely, man. It's one of those deals of the older we get, the better we were, right?
Absolutely. Every day, my jump shot, I actually have a jump shot, get better. And I even tell stories now that I played defense in high school, which really didn't happen.
So let's just jump off right into it, man. You have kind of a unique story because you actually got to play ball at a couple different small schools. You started out at Stanford, and then Stanford consolidated before you were able to graduate, and then you moved on to Marmaduke. What can you tell me about your experience of going to school at Stanford and being a Razorback?
Sure. Well, it's one of those where, as you can imagine, small school, I believe, give or take the year, we would probably have about 200 students, kindergarten through 12th grade. So every grade would have anywhere from maybe 10, 12, 13 students. There might have been some grades and years where those might have gotten the 20s. But it's just a small community. And, with that comes some great assets, some people that treat you like family, people that truly invest in what's going on, and people take pride. They take pride in the school because it was the community. But I truly feel blessed to have been raised in the Stanford community and to be a part of the Stanford School District. But yeah, it was definitely bittersweet. My junior year of the school was annexed actually into at that time the Ridgecrest School District, and then they kept the elementary school open for a few years after that. But after my junior year, I no longer attended Stanford. So
we'll dive into your feelings and everything on having to make that transition your senior year. We'll get into that in just a little bit, but I'm very familiar with Stanford, played against them my entire time until they shut their doors. And there's a strong hoops tradition out there at Stanford. But if you were trying to explain it to someone who was maybe not familiar with Stanford and their history with basketball, how would you go about explaining that to them?
Well, first off, for many years, basketball was the only sport at the school. There were some years kind of intermittently where there may be a baseball program here and there. But as far as athletics, basketball was it. And the thing about Stanford, of course, I went there, started kindergarten in 1982, and 1994 was my junior year, and it closed down. There were so many great athletes, male and female, before me. But what I remember as a kid is the ball games were the community event. That's what you went to. My father was the clock keeper for many years, so there were many nights I was in that gym as a young child. It definitely was the community would rally around the sports and the teams. And I even remember at an early age in elementary, it was one of those where sometimes we might not even have enough, to have an elementary program. And I know my dad, he started some teams and he let the girls play with the boys. And so, of course, we would play against boys teams. Of course, back then we had some outstanding female athletes that were in the program. And we're talking early grades. We're talking second, third, fourth grade, which I know is not too foreign now. But back then that was foreign because, you just didn't have that age group of athletes competing. He was usually waiting until the more formal years of 4th, 5th, and 6th grade. But I say all that to say, definitely a basketball community started early with basketball being the emphasis. And you also have to remember, of course, this was way before cellular phones, smartphones, social media. The entertainment back then was to be in a gym and was to be playing. My family's fortunate that we had access to the gym basically any day we wanted. And my dad was always really good about opening it up to anybody that wanted to come up there and be respectful of the property. And the Stanford gym was open quite a bit. And there were people, former graduates, current students, families, they were up there playing and basically being able to utilize one of the best resources we had in the community.
Well, and as you're talking through this, I mean, memories are flowing through my head because it sounds just almost identical to the way that I grew up at Biggers Reno. And, Biggers Reno and Stanford had many battles over the years. And, to see the similarities between some of these communities that, have been featured on the show. I mean, we've talked to people from Parkdale, from Swifton, from Stanford, several other small town communities. And, the key piece that keeps coming back is that the school and high school basketball was kind of, it was more than the heartbeat. It was basically the backbone of the community. And, when that was taken away, these communities just kind of faded away. And it's such heartbreaking thing to see.
It is, and I can't speak for really the economic situation that's going on in Stanford. I take my boys out there every now and then. We'll ride the roads and get out on an ATV a little bit. I do know that they have a co-op there, a farm co-op, and I think right now maybe the heart of the community. But no, you're right. Whenever the school, of course, left, there were many who knew and foreseen this coming, that it would have an impact on the community, and it's had that. But I believe in the Stanford situation, there's several farming families that have actually purchased the grounds and, keeping it kind of, if you would, as kind of an opportunity for the community to still have that resource.
That's great. That's great to hear because it doesn't always go that way. Sometimes you just see the facilities kind of start to fade away, and it's, it kind of hurts my heart to go back home sometimes and see what some of the facilities there have become. But we'll move on and talk about a little happier things at the moment because we're getting a little dark. So during your time at Stanford, tell me about your teammates and who you played for.
Wow. I'll start in the elementary years because the reason I do that is because sometimes those coaches are the ones that may not get the recognition. A lot of times they're the volunteers that just kind of put themselves out there. And I'm, of course, going to forget some names because the older I get, the more names I forget. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention my father, which is emotional when you talk about it. But heavily invested in me as, of course, his kid, but also in the community that was out there and in his passion for sports, which oddly enough, and he would agree, if he was still living to this day, he would agree that he was not the best athlete or even a very good athlete, but he was passionate about sports. And he was able to convey that to the kids that he worked with. But there are also many other names like Eddie Hunt, I believe coached my father, and then I remember Ronnie Reeves coached me many years out there in the elementary program, and there were so many others, and I hate that I'm gonna forget some names, but those are the names that stick out to me because that as a kid is when you're starting to get molded into the sport, you're starting to get molded to the competition. And you're out there having a good time whenever you're truly passionate about it and enjoying it. Of course, as I get on into my more formal years, and you talk about 7th grade basketball, that's that big jump when you go from 6th grade to 7th grade, and you got your first, full-time paid coach. And, my 7th grade basketball coach was Steve Ritchie, which he coached 1 or 2 years there at Stanford, I believe. And then I believe after that he went on to Marmaduke, which is where he's from. And he coached many, many years at the Marmaduke School District. And on that note, I will say Stanford being a small school, like many other small schools, oftentimes we would get either a young, unexperienced coach or maybe a coach that had 1 or 2 years because they were trying to cut their teeth. And it was difficult at times because you would only have 1 or 2 years and then they would go on to maybe a bigger school. Sometimes that might have been out of fear that the school may be closing, or it might be they just went to a better opportunity. But I had Steve Ritchie for a couple of years, and then next I had I had the legend Hoss Jones. He was my coach for a couple of years. One year in junior high, and then of course he went on to coach me a little bit in high school before he had some serious health issues. And really enjoyed playing for Coach Jones. But some of his other players would remind me that I had him during his mellow days. That was for sure. So he may not have been as I guess harsh or strict as he was in his younger days, but still respect Hoss Jones quite a bit. And he was one of those big names that came in, and during that time, and we can talk more about the years and the good teams we had, but we had some talent during that time. And then Skip Delaney coached me. At middle of the year, Coach Jones had a health situation that occurred. I think actually at the Kel Classic, maybe one of the episodes occurred, and Skip Delaney took over. And Skip and I have still stayed in loose contact over the years. And, I try to always be in contact with all my coaches for the investments that they made in my life. But really enjoyed my time there with Skip, and he coached me the rest of my he coached me my junior year. And so, which was the last year that I played there. But, I look back, and it wasn't just the coaches that coached me. So I'll say this, and I know the climate we're in, and, men, boys and girls playing, and that in different sports. But I'll say this, I was also that junior high kid that the girls coach would often contact me. At this time, it was Lantha Garmas, or my name was Lantha Felty, and she'd say, "Hey, I want you to come scrimmage with my senior high girls." And at that time, I was probably 8th grade, and I was scrimmaging with the high school girls. Of course, there was a different size in the basketball. And my boys coach said, "Well, I don't want you to get used to shooting that girls ball, but just because maybe my athleticism, maybe my strength, she wanted, her girls to compete against something like that." And I know that's common probably in teams place to do that. But even though she had nothing to gain personally from me necessarily, she knew that it would better her players. And so that's when I go back to her as a family. We just did whatever we could to help either team be successful.
Well, it's wild that you mentioned scrimmaging against the girls, because I can remember doing the same thing. My sophomore and junior years, we had a very thin bench. I mean, I think we played with 7 and sometimes 6 players, depending on if someone got hurt or if somebody got in foul trouble, which seemed to happen quite a bit. And there were many after school practices where we would line up and scrimmage against the senior girls team, and it was different. Girls play different than boys do, and I learned a few things about positioning, and I remember getting hip checked several times. The ball would go up in the air and we'd line up, try to get the rebound, and you'd have a hip check just come out of nowhere, and it taught me to start looking for that in the men's game. But we handled it a little different. We were more physical, I think, up high. We didn't use our hips probably the way we should, but I definitely learned something from scrimmaging against girls in my I would say my sophomore and junior years.
Marcus, you bring up a good point. So whenever I was scrimmaging against these girls' teams, of course, they were anywhere from 2 to 3 to 4 years older than me. They definitely did have a lower center of gravity, if you would, and they would definitely use their hips more. But, they were a really good team. I mean, we're talking about players like Haley Faulkner, Tiffany Clark, Terry Pillow come to mind, Jamie Rice. That was probably some of the better years of the girls' program at Stanford. I know they went on to regionals. I don't know if they ever qualified for state or not. I don't recall, but some great teams, and I was just a guy that was hanging out waiting for my next practice, and so I was always willing to jump on the floor and play. But I can assure you they definitely held their own. But the bad thing about me is when I get to play, and some would agree with this, probably most would agree with this, I like to be physical. I like to push and shove and kind of body contact. I really invited that, if you would. And I sometimes would use my elbows, and so I had to be careful, because the last thing I wanted to do was to accidentally elbow somebody, especially if it was scrimmaging against the girls. But I tell you, it was one of those things that I still recall, and I do think it made me a better player from the standpoint of, like you said, you have to always look at your opponent or whoever you're playing against, and look for ways to improve your game.
And for the record, I can confirm the physicality that you played with, because it always seemed like when we lined up, whether you were at Stanford or at Marmaduke, either one, because we played against each other a few times, and I wasn't a post player, but I always kind of found my way down into the middle at some point, and I mean I've been put to the ground more than a few times by some physicality. So yeah, you're not exaggerating on that piece of it.
Well, back then that was just how the game was played. It was a little more physical. There was a lot more post-action, post-play. I watched my sons play. My oldest has graduated. My youngest is a senior, will be at Greene County Tech. And he has that same, I wouldn't say physical presence that I had, but he has some characteristics of it. He wasn't blessed with the size that I was blessed with. But with that said, he plays hard. He's very physical. But players that he plays against, they just don't know how to take it because they don't get that, especially in the low post. Now, we could talk more about the athleticism. We could talk about the offensive schemes where there's not much post action anymore, unless it's kind of for them to set a screen. But you don't see the throw it to the post and kick it back out anymore. Those days have kind of gone away with I guess you could call the progression, the evolution of the game.
Yeah, I would agree, and the physicality has definitely been a piece of that has been lost, and it just feels like the way, and I'm not trying to jump on officials here, but it does feel like the rules have been, I guess, adjusted is a good word, to kind of favor the offensive game over physicality and defense now from what I see as a spectator, and thinking about the way that we all played back in the day and how physical the games were. And I'm not saying dirty play. It was just physical. I mean, it was, basketball is considered a non-contact sport. And when people tell me that, I just kind of laugh and say, well, it's obvious that you didn't watch, early to mid 90s basketball, because there was a lot of contact going on at that point.
Yeah, and I would even go as far as saying I don't know that the physicality has lessened in high school basketball in Arkansas, but the classification that we play at, or that I'm used to watching a lot of, it's really physical on the perimeter. They don't call hand checking much anymore. I literally see people grab players at their waist when they're trying to drive by them, and some of that, of course, is an official preference, and they're trying to be consistent in what's going on. But back in the day, I mean, if you saw someone grab somebody or kind of put their hands on someone's hip as they were driving, that was a quick foul. But if it was in the paint, it was a battle down there. To use the word war would be a little extreme, but it was definitely a battle. That's just how it was. A lot of cross screening. A lot of times you would have two post players down there working it. And of course, now you don't see those offenses as much. You see more 4 out 1 in situation going on to create some places to drive and to kind of kick it back out. But I do understand the game is still physical. I just went to a team camp yesterday for my son, and team camps, of course, are notorious for just letting the kids play. They don't see personal fouls. And a couple of times I thought a little skirmish was going to break out, which made me smile because usually my kid was right in the middle of it. But, and nothing dirty, just physical, and some would say, well, that's not basketball. You're not supposed to be touching the players. And some of that we get from the NBA and things like that. But, the game continues to change. And I guess as it should, but I still enjoy watching the sport and supporting those that I care about.
No doubt. I'm still a basketball junkie at heart. And I mean, I still watch, and, as I get older, I find myself kind of like the old timers were when I was a kid. They would complain about certain aspects of the game and be like, well, that's not how we were taught to do it. And I catch myself doing that from time to time. But I'm a fan of, you mentioned the team camp that you went to with your son. I'm a big fan of letting things get a little more physical in a setting like that, because I feel like you can learn from it and you can better prepare for when you're in a pressure situation and it's a conference game that, it's a 2-point game with 2 minutes left and things start getting, a little bit physical. How to handle yourself a little better because you've been there before. Whereas if these team camps and pickup games and stuff are called pretty tight, you may not react the same, because if you haven't seen it, you don't know how you're going to react in the heat of the moment. The competitive juices get flowing. Sometimes you feel like that your manhood's being tested and you want to step up to that, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do that. And I think to learn that in the team camp is very crucial to success later down the line.
Sure. I agree, Marcus. And I'm the first to admit I did not play a lot of defense in high school. At the time, I thought I was playing defense. And when I got to college, I realized I didn't play very good defense in high school. But, most of those nights I didn't have a sub that would come in for me. I was trying to stay out of foul trouble, because I was one of our main offensive threats. And so I always had to be careful. But at team camps, I let it loose. I got a lot of fouls in, and I would smile every time I would get there. And I'd be like, all right, they're not keeping up with personal fouls, So they get much more physical. But for me, it wasn't that I was physical on the defensive end, and I was a little bit, but it was offensively. You know, when I caught the ball, if I ever got my defender in the air, I was definitely going to make them pay for it whenever I'd go underneath them and try to get an and one. Didn't shoot a lot of threes in high school. It wasn't my game. I could, but I was better suited for the team to be down low, banging it out.
That's another piece of the game that has really changed from the days of when you and I both played to now, because when we were on offense, we all had our specific role, and we still had the positions 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now you see more of, I don't want to call it positionless basketball, but I don't know what else to call it, because it seems like it's more of, instead of having, you know, a 6'6" guy at our level in the Class B, which if you had a 6'6" guy, I mean, you were very blessed. But to have one guy that you knew, if he got the ball outside of 10 feet, he was looking to pass or set somebody else up. He was not a threat to shoot. Whereas now, it doesn't matter who gets the ball at what position on the floor. You have to be aware that, you know, they may throw it up from 24 feet just because that's part of the game plan now.
Yeah, you know, absolutely. One thing for me and most of my teammates, I was, you know, in most years, I was the biggest guy we had, except my sophomore year, and I'll be glad to talk about that team. But in a year outside of my sophomore year, I was the tallest guy we had, so I needed to be down low, you know, close for rebounds. And of course, back then you didn't have a shot clock, and you know the theory was the closer you shoot to the basket, you know, the higher the percentages. And yeah, we had a 3-point line, but it wasn't used as much during the years that I played, or at least for the teams that I played on. But yeah, I think you're right on that. You know, I enjoy the game now. You know, the one that I'm mostly associated with, of course, is my son's school at Greene County Tech, and we live and die by the threes, and you know that's just kind of the philosophy of the coach, and I don't disagree. I think he's very knowledgeable about the game, and he gives us a great chance to win every night we step on the floor. And by the way, I coached for 4 years, and so I'm that parent that I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about this on this podcast, but I'm that parent that, you know, I do give some blind support to the coach, because I know what it's like those few years I coached. And while I want to support that coach, I'm also a parent, you know. So yeah, I want my kid out there as much, but it, you know, it's one of those where I think we're in a culture now. The reason I bring this up is it's concerning. We're in a culture now where the coach is not playing our kid. We just want to move our kid to the next school. And there was always a part of that even back when we played Marcus, but I think now it's almost an epidemic, and it's sad. You know, it's sad that parents aren't happy. They're just going to tell their kid, well, we're going to move you somewhere else. And we're not going to ask you to work harder or to find a way to be beneficial to the team. But I know it's probably not what this conversation's about, but it just came to mind.
Oh, that's great though, because you're preaching to the choir here, because I remember when my daughter was playing in high school, she's graduated now, but you know, there were times she would get frustrated about her minutes. And, you know, my first thing that I would ask her was, well, you know, are you giving it everything you've got in practice? You know, are you doing this? Are you doing that? I mean, are you sure that you're doing everything you're supposed to do to make it to where the coach can't keep you on the bench? You know, you have to do all the work and put all the work in. So yeah, I'm with you 100% there. And I'm teaching my young boys the same thing of like, you know, hey, your playing time is earned in practice. The harder you work in practice, the more likely you are to get your minutes on the court. So absolutely, man, I'm in total agreement with you there. And to move along, you brought up your team from I believe you said your sophomore year. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of the teammates that you played with at Stanford, and if you want to go Marmaduke as well, we can go there as well. But we'll start with Stanford.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to talk about Marmaduke as well, and I'll say that near the end of this conversation. So you asked about sophomore, but I'll start my ninth grade year. We had a really good team in junior high. We were picked to finish pretty well, and we did. I think we ended up getting a runner-up in the conference and the district, but played with some good players. Then the one that comes to mind, my ninth grade year, was actually an eighth grader, and that was Stephen Baines. He was really developing as a point guard, and he and I made really a really good combination there. And there were many other kids, and I'll just mention some names. Of course, I played with Stan Jones, who was the son of Hoss Jones. He and I were in the same grade, and Stan was one of my favorite teammates. And I make that very clear because Stan passed me the ball every time he touched it. And so I was always, Stan's dad made it very clear to him that, Stan, when you touch it, you pass it to Baine. And so Stan did. He was an excellent teammate. And Eric Crossnow played with me. He was real quick and for our school was very athletic. And then there were many other players, too many to really mention. And we even had some that would transfer in now because we were a small school. But my sophomore year, there was a lot of expectation. So at the end of my ninth grade year, they moved me up into high school, and they're at the end of the season, so I got to play in the tournament. I was excited, and I've been practicing with the high school boys all year long, so it wasn't like I wasn't used to the offenses and interacting with them. But I remember, even though I practiced with them all year, that district tournament came around, and we went, and we didn't play well that night. So my ninth grade year, we got beat out. That was kind of depressing because I was expecting, hoping to make a big run. But my sophomore year, we come back, and you mentioned height. Well, for my sophomore year, I was probably 6'3", 6'4". We had another guy on the team. He's 6'5", 6'6", just named Chris Reynolds. We had Heath Fines. He was a left-hander. He's about 6'4", maybe creeping up into 6'5". By the way, those guys were seniors. Had my brother, Patrick Baine. He was 6'2", and he played on the perimeter. Then we had several guards that played with us. That might have been one of the biggest pieces that we had missed. And if we'd had a good point guard, I think we'd have definitely gone even further than we did. But we had a great year. I forget what we finished in conference that year. I think it was either second or third. I know we were playing against Turkmen, and they were really tough. Wiener had a good team that year. Swifton was pretty good. Morrell was always tough. Charlie Brown always had those guys playing great defense. But I remember how we ended the year, and of course let me back up. So my sophomore year, we were supposed to have gone to play in what's called the Zizzers Classic, which is a tournament that Hoss Jones started in West Plains, Missouri, and it at that time was known to have all these big-time D1 talents. But for whatever reason, my ninth grade year, and I'm hopping around here, they wanted us to come a year early. Well, we did, but I got to go to the tournament, but I didn't get to play because as a ninth grader, I lost my eligibility. So my ninth grade year, we go to the Zizzers Classic, and we're playing teams, and I'll mention some of the names. There was a team called Murr, Mississippi, and Murr, Mississippi had Othello Harrington, who went to Georgetown. Oh, wow. They had Ronnie Henderson, who went to LSU, and then they had Jesse Pate, who I believe played for the Razorbacks. Yeah, but they got beat in the finals of that tournament that year by Parkview, who had Derek Fisher. That was the year that Derek Fisher was a senior. So I say all that to say, in Jonesboro, we go to that tournament every year. I think Jonesboro might have finished third or fifth in that. We didn't finish dead last, but we came close. We did beat a really good team. We played Antonio McDyess, who went on and played for many years for the Phoenix Suns. So I tell those stories to say this. I was in ninth grade and didn't technically play, but I was on the team, on the bench, if you would. And we set a record. I think Murr, Mississippi had 28 dunks on us. I think the school, when we played them, I think the score was, I think it was 170. I think it was 150 or 60 to like 70. Like it was, we set the wrong kind of records. But so that was my ninth grade year. We were way out of our league playing those teams. But that just kind of tells you, that Hoss Jones wasn't scared to put us against anybody. So then my sophomore year, we come in. We've got some high expectations, and we have a good season for the most part. But I'll never forget the last game that we had. We were playing Mammoth Spring, and they had a really good team. We didn't know much about Mammoth Spring, but we were playing them in the regional tournament at Turkmen. And I remember us getting beat. I think we lost by like, I don't know, two or three. And of course, I'm a sophomore, and I'm like, hey, I got 2 more years. But it was special to me because I've been playing with my brother, and looking back, you just don't get those opportunities to do that. But we lost to Mammoth Spring, and they went on and became the state runner-up that year. So we knew they were a good team. And oddly enough, we played against Mammoth Spring. They beat us out. Of course, Brad Washel played for them, and he and I went on to be college teammates at Williams Baptist College. But yeah, a great year that sophomore year.
So I seem to remember, and I think I've got this right, but I'm kind of like you. As I get a little older, the years kind of run together. Your final year at Stanford, which would have been your junior year, right? I believe you guys eliminated us from the regional tournament over at Swifton. I was trying to look back through some of my old stuff that I had, and I think I've got this right. I think it was Stanford, but the thing that stuck out to me was it was a really high scoring game. We put up 85 points and still managed to somehow get beat. So it was it was just, back and forth, up and down. I mean, you didn't have time to take a breath. And I tried to talk to a couple of my teammates about it, and they were a little fuzzy on it as well. But it was like, yeah, man, that sounds right. But it's just it's been so many years now that it's kind of hard to remember the exact details of it. But that last year, what do you remember about your last year at Stanford?
Well, I have so many memories that last year. Of course, I'm coming back as a junior, and we lost a lot of talent that had graduated. But we had some juniors who became seniors who were good role players, hard workers. We had Stephen Vines was moving up, and we had some other kids. We only had about, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 guys on the team. But we didn't have the high expectation other than me coming back. Of course, our conference was really good again that next year. Wiener had a lot of talent. Rylan Kiefer came back. Armorell always good. CRA was actually pretty good that year. What I remember most about my junior year, though, is we were going to the NEA tournament and we were not seeded. We were just the small three. We were the B school, and at that time, of course, the classification is a little bit different. But I think they had the B schools, the A, and maybe the AA together. But we played the number one seed in the tournament, which was Manila. And Manila was like, they were rolling. I mean, I don't know. They maybe only lost one game at that point in the season, and they were really good. And I think we had even played them maybe a week or two before that. I mean, at our place, and they just kind of rolled over us. But we played NEA, and we just had a great night. I had a pretty good night. Stephen Vines played great. Eric Crossnell had a good night. There were just some of our seniors made some great plays, and we upset Manila as the number one seed. And I think at that time, I think there might have been stories that's the first time it ever happened that the number one seed had been upset by someone who wasn't seeded. And so it was definitely one of those memories, being because it was at that time the Convocation Center, which for us was obviously the biggest place we had played in. And I remember running off, and I remember a lot of the players from Wiener were down there giving us high fives because we were playing them next round and they didn't want to play Manila. And we lose in the next round, but just to have, that would have been our second victory in the NEA tournament that year, and we got on to our third game. But to have that experience was pretty cool to kind of win as the underdog. But the rest of that year was a great year. I can't remember anything else that stands out as far as, particular games here and there. I do remember that we did have the regional tournament at Swift, and I can't definitively say that we played on the first round. I know we got beat in the second round by Armorell, which was discouraging for us. But of course, back then you had to be the top two teams to go to state, unlike it is now. But yeah, still a great year, great memories. And at that time, I didn't know for sure that the school was not gonna come back, or that we were not going to be able to be playing the next year. But there was enough rumors going around that a lot of high school coaches were very friendly to me during that time. And nothing the AAA need to be worried about. And even though AAA was back then, but it was one of those where I tell people I think I might have got recruited more in high school to play high school ball than I did to go to college. And I try to be funny about that. But no, there was some decisions that I had to make after my junior year. But yeah, great year as a junior. We had Coach Delaney. He did a great job with this. I got to think the most out of us. But wonderful memories.
So let's just go ahead and jump right into that. You end your junior year at Stanford. There's rumors that there probably won't be a school the next year, and then when you finally get the news that, hey, it's official, we're being annexed in to I believe it was still Ridgecrest at the time, but Paragould as we know it now. Talk to me about your feelings and the emotions of knowing the place that you had called home since kindergarten was no longer going to exist.
Well, let's talk about the academic side of that conversation and the athletic side. So
okay.
The academic was, I guess I was a little concerned because, I did really well in school, loved the education I was getting at Stanford. You had so many teachers that just poured into you and invested into you and really cared about who you were. But because of small classes, if you weren't, doing your best or giving it you're all, they were definitely going to hold you accountable. but at the same time, they also were teaching, the rest of the grades that day in high school, so if you're the science teacher, you taught every student in the high school, junior high and high school. So they really got to know you year after year. So I was a little worried about that, but athletically, I was ready for the next challenge. I was ready for the next opportunity. Looking back, I wish several of my teammates would have gone with me, but they didn't. They chose to go to other schools because that was their choice, because for that situation, you were allowed to transfer to any school. And I know I know the transfer rules have changed so much in the past, at least 5, 10, 15 years. But back then, we were allowed, if you would, kind of the choice where we could keep living in the same house we were living in and go to any school we want because of the school getting annexed. But interesting enough, I was already living in Paragould at that time. We weren't living out on the farm at Stanford. We'd already moved due to some financial challenges. We actually moved into the housing projects in Paragould. So I was living on Pecan Grove, government housing, my junior year. And so it was one of those things where the choice to me came very clear. While I had nothing but respect for Greene County Tech and Coach Holder, who was there, I had nothing but respect for, at that time, Rich Chris Rams, which was the longtime serving, very successful coach, Dr. Painter, Coach Painter, CRA, really have some good friends there. Back that time, it was Clay County Central up in Rector. There were several conversations there, but Marmaduke was just, to me, the perfect fit. It was actually quite a bit bigger than Stanford. You went from having 13 to 14 students in your class to about 40 or 50, but it was still a sensible fit. It was about 10 or 15 minutes from my house. Even though I didn't have a vehicle, I could catch a ride with a friend to school. But they were, of course, steep in basketball tradition. And when I got there, I knew the basketball was great and it would be wonderful, but the academics was so strong and was just a really good fit for me as an individual. I look back and go, well, would have I been better if I'd have gone to the larger schools? I don't think so. I think Marmaduke was very receptive to me. I don't think I could have asked for a better support and a better situation. And of course, we were very talented my senior year at Marmaduke.
Yeah, it always helps when you walk into a situation where hey, I think we've got a chance to be pretty good here. And I played against Marmaduke in high school too, and it was always going to be a battle when we went over there or when they came to Biggers, either one, because it was another one of those small communities that basketball was the centerpiece. Marmaduke didn't have football, they still don't, and basketball is it. I mean, they do have baseball, they do have softball, they have other sports, but when you mention Marmaduke to people around Northeast Arkansas, their immediate thought is basketball, and it feels like, I mean, you can speak to this obviously better than I can, but it just feels like it's another one of those communities where basketball is the heartbeat.
Absolutely. And before I get too far on this path, let me make sure I didn't mislead anybody. There was no recruitment violations. My dad did. We didn't get a car, none of that stuff. A lot of my buddies were giving me a hard time. What we got was people who respected us, and we got people who embraced us and treated us as their own. And that was a little concern of mine because obviously coming in as a senior, I'm somewhat got some talent, so I'm like, well, I'm going to take somebody's spot. So you always worry about that dynamic. But and of course, when I get to Marmaduke, a guy that I'd played with or played against several games was Chad Henson. He and our games were very similar. Of course, he would tell me that he could shoot better than me, and whether he's right or wrong, I don't know. But I would always find a way to argue with him. But we were tough to handle with having two big guys like us that can move, if you would. And then we were just loaded with talents. We had a great junior class. I remember Shane McBride. Another one of my good friends, because like Stan Jones, Shane would pass us the ball, which, by the way, you don't see a lot. Guards don't like to pass it to the post now. Maybe I'm just a biased parent. I don't know, but no, Shane McBride, of course, came in as a junior. He played. Daniel Hensley was a junior. We had a couple of other seniors on the Marmaduke team. There might have been some friction at the beginning of the year, and I think maybe one or two of them decided they were done playing. But our sophomore class was loaded. We had. Matter of fact, the sophomore class probably had more talent in it than the whole rest of the team together, if that tells you anything. But, I mean, we had some big guys. We had Josh Dowler, Andy West, Todd Haygood, Rusty Crafton. List goes on and on. Jeremy Egger. I know I'm forgetting some people. We also had a junior. We had Josh Jordan, who was a junior. I mean, we just had all this talent. Our practices were so fun. We had, 16 to 18 kids, and we would scrimmage a lot because that's what Chester Marner believed in, and I liked that. Where you were scrimmaging, that's how you learned to play. And of course, we did have a few drills and fundamentals we would do, but it was more about, all right, let's roll the ball out there and let's scrimmage. And so I love practice. It's kind of like Stanford. That Marmaduke gym was open all the time. Wonderful facility during that time. I mean, I'm not sure there was a better gym around, to be honest with you, before all the arenas were built and all of this. But basketball was it was the sport. I mean, you started playing it in October. You started practicing, of course, in the summer, and you just never stopped. But yeah, great group of teammates. Coach Barner treated me like his own. He and I got along great. And some would say, well, that's because Baine, he didn't ask you to play defense. And I'm like, well, that may be the truth. But I say that we did. We had that 1-3-1 zone that we played quite a bit and very successful. But yeah, as far as the season goes, it's one of those. We had a very successful season, won a lot of the local tournaments. I could just start listing them off, but nobody would want me to bore them with that. But of course, you always remember how it ends, and you always remember thinking we should have done this, should have done that. But I still this day can tell you a lot about that. I can tell you that the team that beat us in the regional tournament is a team that back then we didn't have the turbo clock, that we call it now. But basically, I think it was East Poinsett County. We beat them by either 25 or 30 in the NEA that year, and then we got to the regional, which Marmaduke was hosting, and we got beat. I think it was on the last second shot, and what I remember is the ball actually hit the floor, and it was a few feet from me on the rebound. We just kind of all looked at it. The guy from EPC, grabbed it and went on to hit the shot and upset us. So it was disheartening because we thought we were going to make a run, and even though the next round we had to play a really good team if we had qualified for that, but we were hoping that was the year we could make it to state. So you always, to me, I always remember the shots I missed, not the ones that I made so much. But anyway, regardless, great year at Marmaduke. I have zero regrets and enjoyed it thoroughly academically and, of course, athletically. I felt blessed to be a part of that.
I can relate on you mentioned you remember the shots you missed more than ones you made. The recurring theme on nearly every episode that I've done with any guest I've had is that they remember the losses and those stick with them way more than the wins do. They can remember the big wins, but the absolute soul crushing losses are the ones that are still, in the forefront of their memories 30, 40, 50 years later.
Absolutely. But those are what make you better, right? And so you try to learn from them. But having that last game of the year, there's just, I could definitely feel like, oh my goodness, my high school career is over. And I had some opportunities, of course, to play at the next level. And at that time, there were a few colleges talking to me, and then, things kind of worked out for the best. And I couldn't have been more pleased and blessed for the opportunities that I had at the next level. They were a great fit for me. Others think that I should have done this or done that, or, try to even go a little bit higher. But for me, I felt fortunate and blessed that basketball had provided for me. And I go back to one of my earlier comments about parents, some of their overbearing, I'm blessed and my family's blessed because basketball provided our family a way for me to change maybe my financial trajectory. And my kids don't necessarily need that athletic scholarship, but you'd always be proud of it, of course. So in our house, we've always just let sports be something that provides them an opportunity to maybe grow as a leader or to be a better teammate, but we haven't been so dependent on it for them to get an education because we have other means to do that.
Sure, and I'm with you. I think there's definitely a place for sports because so many life lessons that I picked up from playing not just basketball, baseball as well, but basketball was my favorite. And so that's the one that, I felt like I spent more time on. And, those nights of the open gym, I mean, every time you talk about that, I start thinking back to all the pickup games that I played and all the things that I learned about the game. And then just other lessons as well from those Thursday night pickup games that we would have. I mean, it's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's just so vital, or to me it was to my growth as both a basketball player and as a person. It just played a very significant role.
It did, and it gave me opportunities, outside of just school ball and what was going on. I had, back in that time, I played on AAU teams, travel ball, what it's called now. And the kids that I played with, it wasn't like many of them went on to be great D1 players, but they went on to be great individuals. Of course, they come from great homes, and most of those kids come from the Craighead, Jonesboro area. Of course, some of them did actually go on and play Division I basketball, and I could start naming names, but I won't do that. But yeah, but basketball has truly been a blessing. My kids, I'm proud of them. I'm proud of my two boys, regardless of the awards that they won or not won, or, I just wanted them to be involved and for basketball to have a positive impact on their life like it did mine. And now as a family, we support the OKC Thunder. Years ago, my kids were little, I started buying them basketball cards, and that's the way I got them hooked on the sport. So if any parents are listening, they're wanting their kids to be interested, that's what worked for us. Was I bought basketball cards, and during that time because Pokemon was a big thing back then. I was like, I'm not buying my kids Pokemon cards. I'm talking about it. I might have made a bad financial decision on that, but I chose basketball cards, and they got my kids kind of really attracted to the sport. And the Thunder were an up-and-coming team, and they were, I was like, well, maybe one day we'll get to go to a game, if things work out, because it's about 6.5 hours from here. And we've been blessed and fortunate enough here recently to go to several games, but it's still a bond that I have with my boys that we have that, and especially in those teenage years, I got good kids, but every now and then you need something where you can connect with them on. So
I'm taking notes on that because my boys are just 7 and 10, so I'm writing down basketball cards right now. So I will put that to good use. So as we get ready to wrap this up, Brad, we've covered pretty much every aspect of your career and playing at small schools. And you mentioned your coaches that you played for, but we have to kind of touch on that just a little more, because you played for two of the most legendary coaches in Northeast Arkansas high school basketball, and Coach Marner and Coach Jones. Just elaborate a little bit on playing for two legends like that.
I will, and I was blessed and fortunate, and they couldn't have been more different in their styles of offense and defense, and they were both very successful. So it wasn't like one was better than the other. Let me say this. One liked to be more critical of the officials than the other one did. Now, don't get me wrong. Hoss Jones, of course, would definitely. That's what I'm talking about. He could definitely get on an official, and it seemed like from the tip-off there was a friction. He kind of had that by reputation. But what I saw that as somebody who was fighting for their team. I saw that for someone who was taking up, especially for us big guys that were just beating and banging down low all night. And then you had Coach Barner, who would obviously get on the officials. Don't get me wrong. Which, by the way, Coach Barner, I think 2 years ago, last year, was inducted into the Hall of Fame. Very, very deserving. Went to that reception for him and his family, and that was pretty cool. But he would get intense. Coach Barner was always intense with us, but he was always very positive, encouraging, trying to. I think Coach Barner figured out that it was all about confidence, and if you could convince your basketball team, your players, that they could win on any given night, they were going to do that, and then they would run through a wall for you. So, and Marmaduke, our philosophy was, if we shoot more shots than you, we're probably going to win, and we like to shoot it. So before the shot clock was a thing, we had our own shot clock, I think. So very different. Hoss Jones was more man-to-man defense, things like that, working it offensively. Work the ball until you can get a good shot. But at the end of the day, they were great both ball coaches. Been doing it for a long time, very successful. And of course, yes, not so much myself, I'm saying here, but they were blessed with talent. Both coaches had the ability and the fortunate professionally to have several talented players that played for them. But I always say, coaches develop that talent. And those two guys, I know that Hoss Jones moved around a little bit, if you would, but of course Coach Barner was there for a long time. I think at some point in his career he did step away from basketball, but then he came back as a coach. But they weren't necessarily one of those coaches that were I call it talent hopping, going from school to school, just trying to figure out which school's got the most talent. So I would say Hoss Jones was great about development of fundamentals and teaching you how to play the game. And Coach Barner was really good about bringing the best out in you.
Brad, I thank you so much for coming by and strolling down memory lane with me. It's always a fun journey to hear everybody's story, because while there are similarities, everybody's story is just a little bit different. And, I think a lot of these stories from the smaller schools like Stanford and Biggers Reno, and to an extent Marmaduke, some of those stories don't get the notoriety that they should get. And so hopefully I can kind of help, put a spotlight on guys like Hoss Jones and Coach Barner and some of these legends that may not be known because they didn't coach at a 5A or a 6A level. So I appreciate you coming by and spending some time with me here.
Marcus, I appreciate it, and I'll be remiss if I didn't at least mention two of my college coaches. The first one was Danny Leisure, who recruited me and gave me a scholarship. I'm grateful for that. He coached me 1 year at Williams. And for the next 3 years, I had Jeff Ryder. Coach Ryder was an outstanding coach for me. We went through some difficult years due to the teams and the players that we were playing against, a lot of them Division I talent. But I appreciate those opportunities. And of course, Jeff Ryder and I become good, close friends over the years. And I apologize for anyone who's listening. And if I didn't mention your name, it's not because I didn't appreciate you. It's just I'm getting to that point where all the names are running together, and especially those that coached me. So, Marcus, I appreciate the opportunity.
You bet. Hey, and if anybody got left out, we'll blame the guy that edits this podcast.
Okay. Sounds good.
All right. That's Brad Baine. Appreciate it, Brad. Thanks again to Brad for spending some time with us here on the Final Jump Shot. Now, I've got to admit, it was a nice change of pace to visit with someone that I actually played against back in my day. Don't get me wrong now. I've thoroughly enjoyed every episode to the max, but this one hit just a little bit different. Hearing some of those names that he brought up of his teammates brought back memories for me, names of guys that I hadn't heard in a very long time. But as he brought them up, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that guy. I remember playing against him. And I also have to thank someone very special for getting me connected to Brad and helping set up this interview. None other than my own mother, Angie Carlton. Now, if you know Mom, there's not many people tied to education in Northeast Arkansas that she doesn't know. So thank you, Mom. Appreciate you helping me setting this up. Earlier in the show, I had mentioned that this episode is the finale of season 1 of the Final Jump Shot. Now, this has been quite the journey through these first 9 episodes, one that I honestly wasn't sure what to expect when I first brought this idea to life. But it has been so great to relive some of these memories and learn more about these great players and coaches. So here's the plan. We're going to take a break from releasing new episodes for a bit, and we're going to pick back up with season 2 around the time that the 25-26 high school basketball season tips off in Arkansas. Keep an eye on our Facebook page, because we will have regular updates on information regarding season 2, and I'm sure we'll have some teaser videos along the way to kind of help whet the appetite a little bit for season 2. Now, some of the schools that we're going to be spotlighting in season 2 include Clover Bend, Williford, Blackrock, and a school from way down south that I had to look up myself, Eudora. A big thank you to everyone who has listened to season 1. If you feel so inclined, feel free to leave us a review on the podcast or on our Facebook page or even on the Cam Productions YouTube page. The more reviews we get, the easier it is to grow. Until next time, I'm Marcus Carlton, and you've been listening to The Final Jump Shot.
You've been listening to The Final Jump Shot, a Cam Productions podcast. Subscribe to The Final Jump Shot to ensure you never miss an episode.